Right, good evening everybody and welcome along to this evening's Rushcliffe Borough Council Planning Committee meeting. I'd like to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. A recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the Council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the Local Authorities, Executive Arrangements, Meetings and Access to Information England Regulations 2012, other people may film, record, post on social media or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. May I remind councillors to please switch your microphones off when you're not speaking, thank you, and to switch them on when you are. And just for the benefit of our visitors here today, I'm Councillor Richard Butler, the chairman of the committee, and next to me is Councillor Rex Walker, the vice chairman. And also we have officers here tonight. We have Mrs. Knott, who is the service manager for planning, Mr. Langton, senior planning officer, Mr. Sharman, team leader, and Mrs. Clack, legal services manager. And for a few members of staff here tonight, it's their first meeting at this committee, I think, so welcome along. So the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Eleanor Georgiou sends her apologies.
Thank you. I don't think we have a substitute, do we, for her? No, okay. And item 2 is, does anyone have any declarations of interest? Shouldn't think so. No. Okay, thank you. And item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 9th of May. I'm aware that not all of the members were at that meeting, but for those of us who were here, are we happy that they're correct? Happy for me to sign? Thank you. What's the date? 20th, yes. So I see the moment then, couldn't remember the date. Right, so we will move into the main reason we're here this evening, and that is to discuss planning applications. And we have one application to discuss and decide this evening. And this is land northwest of 42 Wilford Lane, West Bridgford. And Mr. Langton, you're going to talk us through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members are advised that there are no late representations for this application. The application site relates to a parcel of land to the north side of 42 Wilford Lane, West Bridgford. The land is detailed as garden land under the ownership of number 42, though it appears that it has been used to store vehicles for a number of years. The site is accessed from a private drive off Wilford Lane, which provides access to 5 existing dwellings, with the River Trent situated at the northern end of the road. There are neighbouring residential dwellings to the north and east of the application site, and with modern extensions number 42 to the south. To the west is an access track that appears to be used in relation to maintenance to the river, with the Wilford Lane Medical Centre located beyond this. The properties in the vicinity are a mix of styles, with number 42 being of a traditional appearance, with a modern extension in circa 2015. To the east is number 36, is of a similar appearance, with a similar traditional appearance, with 2 contemporary dwellings to the rear, numbers 38A and number 38. To the north, number 40 to the north of the site is also a traditional dwelling. The site is flat and enclosed by Lalandi hedging on the northern boundary, with vegetation including hedging and trees to the west. The site is located within flood zone 3 in an area that benefits from flood defences. Got some photos of the site, and I'll just run through these in order to provide some context. So this is the access to the private drive off which the proposed dwelling would be located from Wilford Lane. This is the view from the private drive looking north towards the application site, which is on the left-hand side of the photo. This is number 42 Wilford Lane, as I said, with the traditional appearance, and you can see part of the modern extension to the rear and the application site beyond this. Closer up view of both the modern extensions number 42 and the application site to the rear. Photo looking northeast towards number 38A, which is the modern dwelling in the middle of the picture, and number 38 beyond this, and you can see part of number 36 in the foreground. And it's a view from the front of the application site, looking straight across to number 38A, front elevation of it, which also has its garden space to the front. And again, taken from the application site, looking to the east towards number 36. And a view looking back down southwards on the private road towards Wilford Lane. Photo of the application site, looking west towards the application site. You see the extension to number 42 on the left-hand side of the photo, and the Wilford Lane Medical Centre in the background beyond the mature trees. And a view of the application site directly looking into it. View of the application site of number 42 in the foreground, looking northeast from the access track as previously mentioned, and a view looking towards the application site from the car park at the medical centre. The application seeks permission for the construction of a single detached dwelling. Dwelling would have a contemporary appearance with a flat roof with solar panels to be installed on the higher part and also with a green roof proposed. Materials include timber cladding rendered to the upper floors with a concrete finish at ground floor level. Dwelling would have a maximum ridge height of 8.4 metres to the highest part. The proposed dwelling would have 5 bedrooms, 4 of which would be located to the second floor, with a 5th bedroom at first floor level, along with a principal living accommodation. The ground floor level would consist of an open carport with bin store and entrance hall with stairs up to the first floor. Gated driveway is proposed to the front with parking provision for 2 cars, with further provision in the carport, with a private garden to the rear. The main considerations in this application are design and appearance of the proposed dwelling, impact on neighbouring amenity, flood risk, highways and parking, ecologies and trees. In terms of the principle of development, Policy 11 of the Local Plan Part 2 sets out criteria against which development on unallocated sites should be considered. Of notable relevance is compliance with the spatial strategy, a high standard of design being achieved that does not adversely affect the character or pattern of the area, that the existing site should not make a significant positive contribution to the amenity of the surrounding area. The proposal would not cause a significant adverse impact on the amenity of nearby residents and occupiers, and appropriate provision for parking and access is made. In terms of the principle of development, the site is located within the built-up area of West Bridgeford, in close proximity to local services, amenities and public transport routes. The principle of development is therefore in accordance with the spatial strategy as set out by Policy 3 of the Local Plan Part 1 and Policy 11 of the Local Plan Part 2. With respect to visual amenity, the existing site represents a vacant plot within an established residential area. It is considered that the application site does not contribute significantly to the visual amenity of the surrounding area. The proposed dwelling would have a contemporary appearance that is considered to be in keeping with the more recent development along this section of Wilford Lane, notably at number 38 and number 38A, and it would sit comfortably within the street scene as a result of this. The proposed materials mix of render, concrete and cladding are considered to be in keeping with the contemporary design and appearance of the proposed dwelling. With respect to neighbouring amenity, the dwelling would have a height that is comparable to neighbouring dwellings in the surrounding area. There would be a separation of approximately 17 metres to the south elevation of number 40, with a large leylandii hedge covering much of the boundary between the application site and the neighbouring property. It's considered that the separation distance is sufficient to ensure the proposed dwelling would not result in an unacceptable overbearing, overshadowing or overlooking impact on number 40. Number 40 is also orientated with its front elevation towards the application site, with its main private garden being to the rear and therefore largely unimpacted by the proposal. The proposed dwelling would be circa 25.5 metres to the dwellings to the west of numbers, but to the west at numbers 36, number 38A, with a relationship that is considered to be consistent with the pattern of development that already exists along the private road. The proposed dwelling would have its principal elevation facing towards the dwellings to the west and would be set back into the plot. Whilst number 38A has its main garden to the front, it is considered that no unacceptable overlooking, overbearing or overshadowing impacts would result from the proposed dwelling. Number 36 has its main garden towards the southeast, and this would largely be unaffected by the proposal. Some loss of light to the patio on the west side of number 36 may result from the proposal, but the neighbouring property has extensive outdoor amenity area, and the potential impact on this patio area is not considered unacceptable. The relationship between the proposed dwelling and number 42 to the south is considered to be acceptable. With respect to flood risk, the site falls within the flood zone 3, which is a high flood risk area. As per the comments provided by the Environment Agency, who raised no objection to the proposal, the site is part of an area that benefits from extensive flood defences to protect the site during a 1 in 100 year flood event. The flood risk assessment provided with the application notes that 211 cubic metres of flood water could be displaced as a result of the proposals, with no opportunity to provide level for level flood compensation within the site. The building has therefore been designed with a void at ground floor level to enable floodable space beneath the footprint of the proposed dwelling. The Environment Agency advised that in the context of the River Trent floodplain, the amount of floodwater that could be displaced is unlikely to result in any measurable change in the flood depths across the flood cell. Furthermore, they advised that whilst there are no guarantees, it is likely, given the location of the site in a densely populated residential area, that flood defences would keep pace with climate change. Therefore, the Environment Agency does not object to this application. As per the response from the Environment Agency, the potential cumulative impact of development of small sites within the floodplain has been considered. As per the Environment Agency's assessment, the flood defences that currently exist would likely keep pace with climate change. Furthermore, in the event of a flood, the amount of floodwater displacement in the context of the River Trent floodplain is unlikely to result in any measurable changes across the flood zone. In summary, the site is at low risk of flooding, and in the event of a flood, the extent of floodwater displaced would not be significant relative to the River Trent floodplain. It is therefore considered that the impact of the proposal on flood risk, both within the site and elsewhere within the area, is limited, and as such, the proposal would not have an unacceptable impact on flood risk. With respect to highway safety, the County Council Highway Authority has raised no objection to the proposal, advising that the increase in traffic that would result from one additional dwelling would not result in a material change to the existing access arrangements. The property would offer at least 3 off-road parking spaces in accordance with the County Council Highway Design Guide. Overall, no concerns are raised in respect to parking or highway safety. With respect to ecology and trees, the application was submitted prior to the introduction of mandatory biodiversity net gain, and as such is not required to comply with these. The application is supported by a preliminary ecological appraisal and bat roost assessment. No protected species have been identified on the site, and recommendations for avoidance measures and enhancement measures recommended by the consultant ecologist have been recommended for conditioning. The arboricultural assessment provided demonstrates that the proposed dwelling would be compatible in relation to the existing trees and hedges on the site. The foundations would be within the root protection area of the ash tree to the rear of the site, and the recommendations have been made to mitigate against potential damage to this tree. These recommendations can also be conditioned. Accordingly, the application before you is recommended to approve planning permission, subject to the conditions attached within the officer report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have 2 speakers on this, or guest speakers on this item, so now's the time to hear from them. The first speaker is Mrs. Mears, who is here to speak against the application. I don't know if you've been told, but you've got up to 5 minutes to talk to us. And if you're still talking at 4.5 minutes, we'll tell you there's 30 seconds left. And then we have to ask you to stop at 5 minutes. So as soon as you're ready, if you press the right-hand button, the red light will come on, and then the clock will start ticking down. So as soon as you're ready, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Mears from 36 Wilford Lane, and objecting on behalf of myself and my husband to the proposed development of one dwelling on the land adjoining 42 Wilford Lane. The objections I raise are also those of other residents on the shared drive, and I have their permission to air the objections. Firstly, I'd like to point out that throughout the whole of this planning application, my property to the east of number 42 has been referred to as number 38. The slide clarifies the correct numbering of 36 and 38A, and number 38 is actually to the rear of 38A and facing onto the river. We have 2 main concerns about the proposed development. The first being the loss of privacy to our property. The proposed development is in flood zone 3, so all living accommodation is first floor and above, with windows looking down over the side and backyard of our property and directly into our first floor bedroom. The new property will look straight over our fence and hedge. We bought our property 24 years ago for the space and privacy it gave us. It must be noted that properties on this shared drive are not like standard estate homes. The living accommodation at the proposed development will look directly over all of Mrs Johnson's garden and into her living area at 38A. Our second main concern, in addition to loss of privacy on our side patio where we sit, is the loss of light, namely the afternoon and evening sun. With the new development, we'll lose in the region of 3 hours sunshine every evening as the sun dips below the proposed development to the west of us. The planning agenda points out that we have a large front garden that we could use to sit in. However, I'd ask you to take into consideration that no one sits in their front garden on Wilford Lane due to the noise and pollution from the ever-increasing volume of traffic. Our patio used to be a vegetable patch, but due to the noise and pollution from the increased traffic, we converted it to a patio where we now sit and enjoy the afternoon and evening sunshine. In the last 24 years, traffic flow on Wilford Lane, the B679, has increased to that more typical of a major A road. This is due in part to increased traffic from all the residential and commercial development, 2 new large comprehensive schools, and an ever-increasing volume of heavy goods vehicles and cars using this road as a cut-through. There's also the additional traffic now the Victoria Embankment is closed. The parking spaces at the new property would be directly across the drive from our exit at number 36, and we foresee problems if we're leaving our property at the same time as prospective residents are reversing out. We already have visitors to number 42 using our gateway to turn round due to lack of turning space. There's also no adequate turning circle for large vehicles on the private drive. The Amazon vans struggle to turn round even when there are no vehicles on the drive, and only by improving the turning circle at the end of the drive would this be safer. The next concern covers everyone on the shared drive. Where will all the lorries, contractors, vans, etc. park whilst the new property is being built? During previous developments on the lane, we've had problems with builders' vehicles parking en masse down our shared drive and often blocking it. Previously, this has been somewhat mitigated as vehicles could park on the land attached to the build, but on the proposed development, there's insufficient space for this. Parking on the shared drive makes it difficult for residents to enter and exit their properties. The applicant mentions the builders' vehicles can all be parked in the front garden at number 42 during the build. The applicant does not currently live at the property and it's let, so how would this be implemented, especially if the plot was sold separately to number 42? If after considering these points the proposal were to go ahead, we would ask that off-site parking for builders' vehicles be a condition of this development to prevent the clogging of shared access road. Also, the building time should be at least 8 AM and not 7 AM as recommended in the notes to applicant. Experience with other building sites around us has shown that builders usually arrive half an hour before the start time, slam van doors, open up the site and greet each other very loudly. The other residents on the lane are mostly retired and 6:30 is particularly early. And finally, the Leylandii hedge between the plot and number 40 provides important screening, but there does not seem to be a specific condition that this should be retained in the event of the build going ahead. Mr. Clarkson at number 40 asks that if this development were permitted, there should be adequate provision to prevent its removal. I'd ask you on behalf of myself and the other residents on the shared drive to take all our concerns into consideration when deciding on the outcome of this application. Thank you.
Thank you. That was well within your 5 minutes, so thank you for that. And our next speaker on this is one of the ward members, Councillor Alan Phillips, please. So it's good to see you back. So as soon as you're ready, up to 5 minutes. Okay.
All development on Wilford Lane is contentious due to the high level of traffic it carries. The definition of lane is a narrow road, which Wilford Lane definitely is, but it carries the volume of traffic of a major road into a city. The lane is often described as a continuous traffic jam in both directions. There are no vehicle restrictions on it, and many heavy goods vehicles use it, helping to break up the road surface, leading to many deep and dangerous potholes. Vehicles trying to get onto Wilford Lane from side roads and properties find it extremely difficult due to the volume of traffic, but we continue to allow more properties to be built along it and add to the problems that already exist. More properties built means more wheelie bins to empty. A refuse lorry cannot get on and off the private shared drive where the application site is located. This means it spends more time parked on Wilford Lane while bins are emptied and traffic builds up behind the refuse lorries. Residents on Wilford Lane have to put up with constant congestion, poor air quality from exhaust gases, noise from vehicles, particularly heavy goods vehicles bouncing over potholes and broken road surfaces, sunken ironwork from the consistent pounding of vehicles over them is another issue. But we continue to allow more building along Wilford Lane, knowing all these issues. Wilford Lane has always flooded during periods of extreme weather over many decades. Flood defences along the River Trent has given some protection in recent years, but with the looming issues of climate change and much wetter weather, we cannot allow more building in high-risk flood zone 3 areas without serious consideration of the consequences. The Environment Agency makes the point that the local planning authority should take into consideration the cumulative impact of multiple small developments within the floodplain. The Environment Agency has advised it is concerned by the cumulative effect. Wilford Lane experienced flooding in October 2023 and January 2024, as can be seen in the photograph. And the road had to be closed so through traffic for several days. The flood defence walls were not breached, but water and sewage continued to flood onto Wilford Lane, even though the rain had stopped days earlier. So how can this be? Because river levels remained high, water that would have drained into the river was actually backflowing and coming out of the drains and sewers onto Wilford Lane and the surrounding areas. Properties on Wilford Lane and in Wilford were flooded, including the tram line, the paths near Gresham playing fields, the new Aldi store, the tram substation was flooded and had to be powered down. Beckett Way was flooded and water poured from manhole covers in the vicinity for 3 days. Only when the River Trent levels started to fall did the flood levels start to fall. There has been more flooding in the area in recent years due to the overdevelopment and the loss of vegetation and natural soakaways. Whilst this application is small by comparison to other developments in the area, it is part of a cumulative effect. All councillors agreed to a motion raised and passed at full council in September 2023 that flooding is becoming an increasing concern for residents and more needed to be done. As councillor for Compton Acres Ward, I am part of a working group that includes stakeholders from the city and county councils, Severn Trent, Environment Agency, the Net, residents and local councillors, all looking at the flooding issues and potential solutions for Wilford Lane area. The Environment Agency has said that the Greythorn Dyke does not have any spare pumping capacity and did not want it to be used for removing additional water from areas that are not currently connected to it. The application site sits just 50 metres from the Greythorn Dyke, which drains into the River Trent, also another 50 metres away. This committee may look at this one application and wonder what the fuss is all about. You may think that if the flood defence wall is breached, the whole of West Bridgford is likely to be flooded. I am sure that would be the case. Hopefully, I have demonstrated that it doesn't have to be a flood defence wall breach to flood this area. In October 2023 and January 2024, water that would have usually drained into the River Trent was unable to do so because the river level was too high and the pressure pushed it back out of the drain covers onto the roads. With all the previous development and Wilford Lane flooding has been a problem waiting to happen. It's happening now. We must resist any further cumulative developments that reduce flood water capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. Again, that was well within time. So bang on 5 minutes. So thank you for that. So we've had points raised by Mrs. Mears and Councillor Phillips. Mrs. Mears lives at 36 Wilford Lane and points out, raises some issues and concerns that we've heard: loss of privacy, loss of light, parking spaces, build of vehicles queries and timings, and the query about Leylandii trees. And Councillor Phillips concentrated on flooding concerns. So can we pick up on any of those, please, and help us move forward? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the matters of overshadowing in relation to 36 and 38A are largely covered in the committee report that's already been presented. So I won't go over those in any great detail. The matters of parking, the Highway Authority do not object to the application. And if members were concerned about parking during construction, they could look to consider a construction management plan if they considered that was something that was of concern. In relation to trees, to highlight that there is a tree protection condition, condition 9 on the recommendation, which requires the submission of tree protection measures prior to the commencement of development. And in relation to the flooding issues, there's two aspects here. There's the obviously flood zone 3 and the River Trent flooding, fluvial flooding, which is defended by the River Trent defences. And the issues on Wilford Lane, which is more to do with surface water pooling and then how the water is obviously then dealt with after that point. In terms of the surface water for this site, there is a condition that requires surface water to be detailed, and there's a condition that requires details to be submitted and agreed, which would manage surface water on site and not worsen the existing runoff situation. And in terms of the fluvial flood risk in relation to the Environment Agency, members' attention is drawn to the Environment Agency's formal comments where they do not object to the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, colleagues, so we have an application before us. We've heard the description of the application and comments from our visitors. Who would like to make any comments and any questions from anyone, please, or before we go to a decision? So I don't see. Right, gosh, this is unusual. Oh, suddenly we're waking up. So we'll go Councillor Edivine, then Councillor Thomas, then Councillor Mason.
I was already fully awake, Councillor Butler. So can we, it may not be of direct importance, but obviously we've talked about private drive. The applicant has no share in that private drive. I'm just a little bit concerned, having seen the pictures of the private drive, that, yeah, do they actually have a, so how do they establish a right of way over a private drive to a building site? Does that make, it's sort of, I know it's not direct, it just bothers me.
I suspect we might be told that's more of a legal thing between neighbours as opposed to being a planning. But there again, I will turn to our experts on.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that would be the case. It'd be a private matter, as per any access arrangements are.
So effectively, if the planning permission was granted, technically, someone could prevent access to the site.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, that can be the case. It is something that can pop up often, but as I say, it is a private matter.
Okay, it's not something for us to get involved with in that respect. Councillor Thomas, please.
Thank you. I've got a few questions really. The access road, how wide is the access road and how does that compare to sort of standards for developments of this size?
So I was hoping that it would show up on there. You'll have to excuse me. At the moment, I don't have the exact figure, but we can find that. But obviously,
5.8 metres at the narrowest.
So,
yeah, we'll get that. We've heard what was said.
Right.
Okay, but bearing in mind it's a drive anyway, isn't it? So on you go to your next point.
It's a private drive, serving how many houses in total?
currently 5. It'll be 6 if this proposed dwelling was erected.
Okay, thank you. What is the depth of the back garden to the boundary?
So it's approximately 7.6 metres.
Right. Does the Rushcliffe Design Guide suggest it has to be 10 metres?
So within the Rushcliffe Design Guide, there is sort of suggestions for sizes of rear gardens, but in certain other material considerations need to be taken into account, such as the overall size of space around the property, as well as what the property would back onto in respect to overlooking. Obviously, this application site doesn't back onto any residential properties with respect to overlooking or overbearing impacts.
Okay. Thank you. And what about the remaining amenity space for number 42? Is that considered adequate for number 42?
Number 42 has a large garden to the front of the property between the front elevation of number 42 and Wilford Lane, and as such, it's considered that adequate amenity space remains for that property.
Does it just have a front garden? Does it have any
front, and which wraps round to the side where the rear extension is here? So it sits within a substantial plot.
And what's number 42 used for? Is it a single dwelling, or is it divided into multiple units?
It's my understanding that it's a single dwelling.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the overshadowing of the property opposite, has a sun tracking sort of study been provided or requested at all? Or is it not considered sufficiently close, really, for that to be an issue?
In this event, the separation distance, when considering the relationship of the existing properties on the drive and the separation distance to the properties to the east of the property, are considered acceptable. No sun tracking study has been considered required in this instance.
Okay, thank you. I've got a few more things. I can't read them very well, so I'll come back if I may.
So that's it for now, is it? Okay, thank you. Councillor Mason.
Okay, thank you. I seem to have seen it's quite a substantial lot of reading, quite technical, and thank you for that. Is there the fact that there's going to be all these large vehicles going up this at times quite narrow drive, and the road surface, and there will be a substantial use. Did I read somewhere that there wouldn't be any compensation or any money towards making that drive more acceptable when the building has finished?
So yeah, as per the,
because there will be damage done, I would think.
Yeah, as per the question from Councillor Edavine, the condition of the private drive is a private matter between those who have a stake in that, and it's not a material planning consideration.
And if that all comes under the same thing, yeah.
That's correct.
Right. The other one is, can I just have a look at the front of the building and
the proposed dwelling?
Yes, the proposed dwelling. That's it. Now, from reading it, it looks as though, the first floor, the bottom floor, is not solid.
It's part of the.
To me, that looks fairly solid at hard standing, and I wondered how much actually hard standing space is on that site for parking, and in what way it has been helped to alleviate flooding. I think I've seen it, so I just want it verified, please.
Yes, thank you. So the carport, as identified by the arrow here, is an open carport both to the front and to the rear. So there'll be no garage doors on
Okay.
that, thereby allowing water to flow through, and also allowing cars to be parked right up and underneath that property without obstructing any garage doors.
What about drainage for the water coming in? I mean, I know when my house floods, if it goes in the garage, it can't get out. It can't go down. We have to wait for it to all come out. I just wondered if there was any flood alleviation done on the actual ground that the house sits on and hard standing.
So in terms of that specific flood alleviation, that's not considered necessary in this location, because with the flood defences in this location, it's at low risk now,
Okay.
at low risk of flooding. In terms of drainage, as per the conditions, a surface water drainage strategy would be required to be submitted as part of the discharge of conditions process.
Right. Okay, but it hasn't been included in this report.
No, as I say, it's not been submitted upfront. Surface water drainage strategies are often dealt with by way of condition because of the technical nature of the information involved. The lead local flood authority have been consulted and haven't provided specific comments on this application in relation to surface water drainage.
So that could be something else that could hinder the proposal if it was deemed that they either couldn't do it or it was not fit. I mean, I'm in a floodplain. I live opposite one as well, and I know that it takes a while for the water to drain out, even though we've got very little actual hard standing. But it does make a difference to other houses that do get flooded. That's all. But it seems to me that the application itself, there's quite a lot of information of maybes that could actually stop it going ahead if you count the drive, the hard standing, the thing. So, but none of that is a consideration at this stage.
Perhaps some of the conditions are worth reading.
Yes.
Again.
Yes.
I'm looking sort of between paragraphs 14 and 17 in particular, about flood mitigation, disposal of foul and surface water has to be submitted to us before any development takes place. So I would think that would be of some assistance.
Yes, it was just a question of understanding what is available to be, coming forward to us, and what is actually after whatever our decision is.
I think the fact that there are quite a lot of conditions here that would mean that they can't, even if permission is given, they can't actually do anything physically until there is confirmation and answers to the conditions that have been.
That's what I mean. There's quite a bit of protection from that point of view.
There is.
It wasn't, a criticism. It was purely the fact of getting my head round. It's actually the protection that's there. Thank you.
That's fine. And Councillor Calvert, please.
Thank you, Chair. In the 1980s, I used to play dominoes down at the old pub every Friday night after a hard week's work. And one of the guys I played with lived on Wilford Lane, and he used to write incessantly to the Evening Post about the amount of traffic. And that's in the 1980s. Now let's look at what's happened since then. There's been endless amounts of development. So I've got a concern about the cumulative impacts, and this is something that was definitely picked up by our speakers. This seems to be, I've just mentioned traffic, but also the issue of flooding is a particularly difficult one. And in the report, it says here that the Environment Agency encourages the local planning authority in the decision-making to consider the cumulative effects of multiple small developments. And I would add all the large developments as well. And Councillor Phillips has shown pictures of the flooding that was in October 23 and January 24. The report also talks about the fact that in October, I think it was October 2016, there was no issue about the flooding or the traffic, and so that is a reason why we should let this be given permission. But I query with the big increases of climate change and flooding that I question whether we can really look back as far as 2016 and make an appropriate comparison. That conditions are definitely different. So my overall question is, is there any way in which we as the planning committee can ultimately say enough is enough on this particular area, this lane where there's major flooding, not necessarily within the immediate vicinity, but further on, that it really needs a pause in the development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, there is reference to how cumulative effects are considered in the report, but can you just perhaps explain it more and pick up on it, please?
Yes, thank you. With respect to the cumulative impact, as stated within the report and within the comments earlier, the application site is within an area that benefits from flood defences, and therefore, whilst it is within flood zone 3, it's not identified as being an active floodplain. Thereby, it's not designed to flood like an active floodplain would do, where displacement from those areas would contribute further to flooding downstream. As I say, the site is protected from flooding. The Environment Agency have advised that in all likelihood it would continue to be protected from flooding, keeping up with the effects of climate change because it's a densely populated area. As a result, the cumulative impact on these sites is not considered to escalate the situation with regards to flooding in the same manner that if it was on a functional floodplain, that could be a consideration.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mallender and then Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. I really want to expand on what Councillor Mason asked about, because even though the ground floor is open, it provides specifically flow through, it's not a permeable surface. And the officer said that the flooding on the road is surface water that just can't run away. But Councillor Phillips said that it bubbles up, so it's groundwater bubbling up. So it's not quite, as far as I know. Could you explain to me the difference later between the surface water that accumulates and also the groundwater, or is it really the same thing, that there's so much surface water that the groundwater has nowhere to go? Because my daughter lives in Wilford, and I cycle along Wilford Lane, which is, quite possibly risking my life, but I do so. And I've seen that water pour. It's like a fountain. It comes up there. So I think, could we put on a condition, should we approve this, to say that there should be a permeable surface on the garage floor? Because any sort of paving or hard surfacing, even in front gardens, has a cumulative effect. So there's been 4 million front gardens paved over in Britain. And even though a lot of those are less than the required 5 square meters that you need to have a permeable surface, if you add those all together, that's an enormous amount of paving. It's not soaking into the soil or the grass. And apart from the value to wildlife, it's also the problem that it's not soaking away. It's becoming surface water and going onto the road. So could we put a condition on to ask for the surfacing of that ground floor to be permeable, or basement, whatever they're calling it? And The other thing I want to ask is there was mention of a construction condition. What sort of things could we put in a construction condition, please?
Okay, thank you. So quick query about whether permeable conditions can be put in and construction conditions. I suspect on the construction conditions side, that could be part of the negotiation and discussion that goes on when a construction management plan is prepared. But over to your good selves, if you can help us with those.
Thank you, Chair. So in relation to the drainage inquiries, there's already a condition about the surface water drainage of the site and a scheme to be submitted and agreed. So that would obviously look at soakaways as a first port of call. So any water that's created, surface water created by the site, would be going to a soakaway. If that's not possible due to the soil conditions, then it's likely they'd come up with a system that it would be stored on site and released at a slower rate to improve the current runoff rates. So we've got a condition that requires those details to be submitted and agreed already prior to the commencement of development, I believe.
And then the construction.
Yeah. There's also a hard landscaping scheme condition on these, on the recommendation condition 3. So we will be looking to agree details of hard as well as soft landscaping. So the external areas we can look to agree a permeable surface as well. In this case, if that's what is required.
Just checking the conditions.
So the surface water drainage condition doesn't cover construction, and largely a construction management plan is about parking and impact on like noise and things like that. I'm not sure it would be appropriate to put the surface water drainage into that, because it would be for a temporary period, and it's because of the scale of the development, it's unlikely that there's going to be, you know, lots of parts of the site that are going to be blocked from being permeable, apart from, you know, storing of materials. So I'm not sure if it's necessary to put a condition on construction for drainage on this scheme.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you.
Chaplin.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so I think it's quite hard as planning committee to overrule the judgment of experts like the Environment Agency and whatever over flooding. For me, this decision seems to be coming down to the loss of amenity to number 36 is in the judgment of officers to be acceptable, but obviously in the residents of number 36 to be not acceptable. Can I ask, do you accept Mrs. Mears' 3 hours loss of sunshine on her patio? Because that doesn't seem very acceptable to me. Do you accept that that's going to be what happens?
I haven't done a study in terms of the exact number of hours that the dwelling would result in the loss to that specific part of the site. But as noted in the report, impact on amenity, as you say, is a matter of judgment. Where a neighbouring property is set within a large plot within a large garden, you have to look at that as a whole, as opposed to just one specific site within the plot. My view and the view as planning officers is that any sort of small amount of loss of light to that specific area would not result in an unacceptable loss of amenity when taking into account the overall development and the overall amount of amenity space associated with the neighbouring property.
So there is guidance about how you decide, and so you're saying because the rest of the garden's quite big, they could move. Yeah.
Yeah, paragraph 41 might be helpful in that respect.
It's just to clarify that if there is harm, there needs to be a balance of, is that enough to refuse the application? So even if there is a loss of light to some of the garden, we would have to consider, is that sufficient enough to refuse the application and defend it? So I think there's that balance that needs to be had there, and that's kind of the conclusion we came to. It is not enough harm for a reason for refusal.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wells, please, and then Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. Talking about the carport and the soakaways, I have two soakaways on my property running from the roof. Goes into the drain and a pipe goes along the earth, well, under a concrete path into a soakaway in the grass. So taking on what my fellow councillors have said, I think it's quite feasible in the carport to have a hard standing to take the weight of the car or cars, because it's wide enough for two, and have it angled so it goes into the drain and it runs straight into a soakaway, because the garden is over 7 metres. Can we have that as a condition, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So that is sort of the level of information we would expect to see in the surface water drainage plan that will be conditioned.
Thank you. And Councillor Ellis, please.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. I am genuinely torn on this one. My sympathies lie with the objectors, but I don't really find it in myself to conclude that the objections are sufficient to refuse the application. It's a hard judgment to make, and I would take no personal satisfaction in actually judging one way or another. But I think I would have to support officers' recommendations when the chips are down.
Okay, thank you. Probably no need to come back on that on anything, but that's one of the reasons we have a planning committee is to weigh up the various arguments. Given what you've just said, are you in effect making a recommendation or proposal? Okay, fair enough. I'm not putting words into your mouth there, but I'll just listen to what you said. Righty ho. Well, right. Sorry, who's having the house full again? I've got a house full of hands again. Right, now let's think about this. Now, Councillor Thomas, you did say earlier you've got some more questions. Shall we get those? Have you got them, or do we want to get them out?
So, what would be the situation for parking for number 42? I don't think I asked that one. Parking for number 42, given that this is their car park that's being used.
Well, I think it's in the garden of 42, so I would have imagined at the existing part. But sorry, I'm taking over, aren't I? I shouldn't do it.
No, happy to hand over to you. But no, so the existing application site is not used for car parking for number 42. They have parking in front of the modern extension that's to the rear of the property. The existing site, as it stands, is fenced off. It's my understanding they don't use it for private parking associated with everyday activity.
Okay, thank you. I had a question about condition 17, which is the one about the surface water and foul and water. It says the development must not be occupied for first projects until the drainage scheme has been implemented and completed. And so then it goes in the second paragraph to say it has to minimise the risk of flooding elsewhere. Increase water attenuation storage on the site and minimise the risk of flooding elsewhere, which I think is contrary to something that was said earlier. Was it the Environment Agency that said it didn't have to attenuate water? Was there something in your report earlier that said that you know, didn't have to attenuate, it didn't have to improve the situation, as it were?
So I think when we're looking at the surface water drainage strategy condition and the the Environment Agency comments in relation to flooding. We're actually looking, whilst we are dealing with water and water on the site, we're actually looking at two separate matters. The Environment Agency are commenting on potential flooding of the site, largely coming from the river. Whereas when we're looking at surface water drainage, we are looking at the increased runoff as a result of the property being developed on this site, and how that's dealt with to ensure that as per the condition, that we minimise the risk of flooding elsewhere. So that's the reason for that condition.
Okay, thank you. But the fact that the garage is on stilts and there's no accommodation on the ground floor must indicate that there's some risk of flooding being identified for this property.
The application site is within flood zone 3, and this is a requirement of the Environment Agency for application property for new dwellings within these locations. In the instance that there was to be flooding, but as per the report, the site does benefit from flood defences.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
I haven't finished. Sorry. Condition 16. Is asking for a TM59 overheating assessment. I was wondering what that was.
So this is in respect to properties that have large amounts of glazing, such as this property, and as you will often see on contemporary dwellings, and this relates to occupier amenity.
Okay, thank you. And well, I thought I'd ask because I didn't know. The hedge protection for the Leylandi hedge was raised on behalf of the applicants, of the neighbours behind. Has anything been done about that in the conditions?
Yes, I think Greg commented on this earlier, where we've got a tree protection details to be submitted. And we also have the requirement for a hard and soft landscaping scheme to be provided as well.
Okay. Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Who was next? Was it Councillor Eddivine? Yes, Councillor Eddivine, please.
I think, like Councillor Ellis, I think I do have a lot of sympathy. What I would say is that over my years in the planning committee, where I've looked at cases of overlooking, which I thought would be overlooking, and the officers have not agreed with me, I've normally found that the officers are right, I have to say, because that is, after all, their job. It's very, very difficult to come up with all of the, overcome any of the other objections, because as Councillor Chaplin says, they are supported by statutory bodies. So if we were to turn this down, then we would be going against the guidance of statutory bodies. So I am going to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation, but I would like some conditions attached. I have to say it's a first for me to find someone wanting to retain a Leylandi hedge, but there is hope in the world. But actually, one of the concerns I would have is that without some sort of condition, they could just come along with a chainsaw and chop down the Leylandi hedge, because it's not something that you've put a TPO on, I don't think. So can we actually have a condition that would ensure that the existing Leylandi are in some way either retained or replaced with something that would provide a similar barrier? Secondly, obviously the construction management plan that we've talked about, it's obviously going to be incumbent on the developer to satisfy their neighbours that they can actually come up with a plan that isn't going to block them all into their houses while construction is coming on. And obviously the other issues are ones that actually pertain to the ownership of the private driveway, and therefore they're not planning matters but would become legal matters for the owners of the private driveway to take up with the developers. So things like reinstatement, etc. have to say there seem to be less potholes on the drive than many of our roads, but that's another matter. So I am going to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation, subject to those conditions that I've talked about and a satisfactory wording of said conditions.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if condition number 9 does actually allow for that, because it does refer to, where are we? Details of tree protection measurements, and the reason being to ensure adequate protection of existing trees and hedgerows.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether that actually covers it, but again, I'll look for.
Yeah, I just want that reassurance, I guess, because I'd hate to see someone take a.
No,
actually, I'd love to see them take a chainsaw to a leyland edge, but
we're just checking on that.
But I wouldn't like, in this instance, for it to be done.
No. We're just looking at the tree plan to see if it is included in that. So we're just looking at
whilst they're looking at that, can I also say, obviously, I think Councillor Phillips made an awful lot of comments about the flooding, and I think it's fair that he's made those comments. I think it's a shame that we have our hands tied by statutory bodies on that. And, you know, we all are aware of the flooding that occurred on Wilford Lane last year and earlier this year, albeit not in that exact proximity. Yeah, it's frustrating for us as a planning committee to have to bow to some of the bodies that disagree with us.
Such as the nature of the system. So just while we're still looking this up, Councillor Mason, you're very anxious and you wanted to speak, didn't you?
Sorry. It's only to say a Leylandii the trees are very good as a screen and to stop. But if they are left to grow and are not cut at all, they can be a real problem. And I wondered, has anybody ever said, yeah, okay, we'll protect the Leylandii, but it can't be any more than, I don't know, 20 foot, 30 foot. They grow to 50 and above, and huge and wide. Not only do they grow up, I have one around 3/4 of my, which I love, but I keep to about 10 foot, which I consider is reasonable to keep privacy, but not to, but they're about from there to here, wide. Oh, and then we shave them and give them a haircut. But yes, is there anything that can be done that says that it has to be kept in a reasonable size? No, I bet there isn't.
Not sure about that. I suspect not, but you're quite right. Leylandis, if they're not looked after, they can take over. And of course, we've all experienced, I suspect, complaints from neighbours of neighbouring Leylandis asking the council to do something about them. But anyway,
you want them a certain height.
Yes, but I think we're going to get some professional advice.
So the hedge is shown on the tree plan. So it is conditioned. It's identified as there's 2 options. You could top it to 7 metres and maintain it as a high hedge, and this is through the tree survey, or remove it and plant a more native species rich hedge. That's not been decided yet. We got a condition for further information. It's unlikely we would ever TPO a Leylandii.
Very unlikely.
And conditioning it to meet a certain height is difficult because of enforcement. You know, if we'd have to go out and measure it, if it was, say 7 metres and it was 6.5, is that significant? There's all that kind of and expectations. There is, you know, it is of a significant height, so it does provide that barrier. If it were to be removed, that barrier is gone, but there is still a potential for boundary to be on there that could do erect a fence up to 2 metres without planning permission. But there is a condition on there. If members wanted to put an extra condition to protect that hedge, I would just advise that it might be difficult to enforce a very strict condition on it.
So there we are. Right, Councillor Ellis, I think you indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Having chickened out from the opportunity of proposing a motion myself, I am prepared to second the motion that has been proposed.
Along with the
conditions,
conditions as well. Yes, you can, Kit. So we're just going to get some clarification on the conditions.
So I've written down, if I've missed something, shout at me. Leyland eye hedge, Leyland eye hedge protection. I've just advised on that, so I'm not sure if that's still wanted or not. Construction traffic issues. Is this the construction management plan that we've talked about?
So in other words, there should be those conditions in there, but they can't start work.
Oh.
Councillor Ellis, can you turn your mic?
Oh, sorry.
They can't start work, obviously, on the building until that construction management plan is in place, which gives some reassurance to the residents of the private off of the private drive that they will. Yeah, construction is disruptive. We all know that, but it needs to be minimally disruptive, and particularly because of the traffic on Wilford Lane generally.
Yeah.
So,
sorry.
Yeah, so that's basically
Yeah, so that's a definite. The Leyland eye.
As far as we can go without putting TPO on. I think actually condition 9 probably does cover it because it's existing hedgerows, and that would be deemed a hedgerow. I think my concern was that if permission is granted, that someone comes out with a chainsaw and because you can't TPO them and removes more.
Yeah.
So.
And that is a risk, and it's a risk everywhere. And I could take advice, but it's probably unlikely we TPO a Leyland eye hedge. But we have also got a soft landscaping and hard landscaping scheme. Yeah. So we've kind of got two conditions that it falls under.
Okay.
So are you still looking to? Sorry, just for clarity and the vote.
I think that probably does cover what we've talked about. There is. I'm just trying to think of what Councillor Mallander's proposal.
While you're thinking there, Councillor Mallander has indicated to speak again, so maybe Councillor will just come in on this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to, if you look at paragraph 19 of the report, it says that the proposed building respects the root protection area of the Leyland eye hedge and the holly tree, and then it talks about the ash tree, and there is talk about shelter for wildlife, which obviously is provided by any tree, really, including Leyland eye. Birds do nest in them, and it does provide shelter, which is quite important. And if you look at condition 5 as well as condition 9, I think we could use that as further protection. Condition 5, sorry. Which actually says in reference to vegetation and nesting birds and vegetation removal. So those that could also be used as well as condition 9, I would have thought, to help protect the Leyland eye hedge.
Thank you, that's very helpful, Councillor.
But I certainly would not like to see it replaced by a fence, because that does not provide any shelter for nesting birds or hedgehogs or anything else.
Indeed not. So that condition, does that make it clear on the conditions then?
I've got one more.
Oh, one more, yeah.
Sorry. You then went on to say about ownership of private drives.
Obviously, that's not a
planning matter.
So we can't condition that. So,
I was possibly referencing that for the benefit of the people in the room.
So the only condition that we're adding is the construction management plan. Is that correct?
Yes, as long as we're content that all of the other things that we've discussed are covered by existing conditions, which I think we probably are.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Thomas.
The hours of operation of the construction are covered in the advisory note and not in a condition. I take the point that as a construction management plan, that could include and should include hours of working. I'm just wondering if that should be a separate condition rather than advisory note or included in the construction management plan. And one other thing is, in terms of hours of deliveries and so on, this road has got a lot of school traffic up and down it, and I'm wondering if there should be something in terms of looking at the hours for deliveries and so on.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. So in terms of the construction management plan, the Highways Authority would be consulted as any discharge of conditions when they came to discharge that. So if they had concerns about the operating hours and school peak hours, etc., then they could raise them at that point in time. And we would usually expect a construction management plan to also include operating hours as part of it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And in that, in considering the construction management plan, would you consider the comment that was made about if it's 7 a.m. that actually, and it is true that construction staff start arriving at 6:30, and it should, and that is disruptive. We all know that. Anyone who's been near a development, it knows that, you can't believe how early they come on site.
So the construction management plan can talk about deliveries and it can talk about construction times. But if someone decides to try and deliver something earlier and is on a highway, it's not something that we can necessarily, if we can talk to them and say don't do that. But if they're parked on a highway waiting to deliver something, it's not something that planning can
enforce it.
But we can maintain that relationship and encourage that not to happen. But we can have that discussion when we've got the construction management plan in place.
I think it was more the point, not so much a delivery vehicle arriving and blocking the highway and creating mayhem on Wilford Road in rush hour and school run time. It's more, the point that if someone's allowed to start at 7 and they all arrive at 6:30, that in itself is disruptive. So can you actually say that no one should actually be on the site until 7 o'clock as part of the construction plan?
I think it can be discussions that can be had.
Yeah. I'm just trying to cover some of the objections to make sure that if we are passing this, that the objections that have, or good points that have been raised, are actually covered and we can do as much to mitigate some of the concerns.
I think we have, but Helen, if you want to come back in.
Yeah, I think if you're happy to delegate the condition to us, we have a standard construction management plan condition, and we can highlight the issues that we want, such as hours of operation and things like that. But then the finer details will come through the discharge of conditions route.
Right, okay. Councillor Ellis.
Just one point, Chair. We do have the right, I think, to alter the starting times, and I think 7 o'clock is very early. Could we stipulate an 8 o'clock starting time?
That would be dealt with through the construction management plan. So if they came in and said we want to start at 7 and we didn't feel comfortable with that, we would go back and ask for an amendment to that scheme before it was approved.
Good. Right. Okay. Wow, what a discussion we've had there. So I think we've heard a lot, and we've got the recommendation moved by Councillor Edivine and seconded by Councillor Ellis, along with the additional and amended conditions. I think we need to make a decision now on this. So show of hands, please. Those in favour of the application, please show. And anyone against? There's one against. So permission is granted, but with the extra information and conditions that we have discussed. And I think we certainly did have a good discussion on this, and it's important that we do so for all the reasons we heard. Okay, so thank you. That is the only actual application we have this evening. But the next item on the agenda is item 5, which is noting the recent planning appeals. So they're there for noting, unless anyone has any questions. I think they're quite self-explanatory, aren't they? So, yeah, okay. So that is the final item on the agenda. So what I will do now is I'll close the meeting at 7:15,